Hi, guys. So we are live. Thanks for everyone that has joined. I did a quick intro a few minutes ago. I'm sorry for those of you that have missed it. But long story short, we have 3 awesome speakers and then a little networking session at the end. So please stick around for that. And next up, I'm very pleased to welcome Gregor, who's the founder of scoutbee. They've been an awesome success story when it comes to B2B marketplaces in Europe, and one of the only actually European success stories that has really gotten to scale when it comes to B2B marketplaces, as B2B marketplaces are still quite a nascent space. So really pleased to have you with us. And today, Gregor will be talking about organizational design behind B2B marketplaces. I'll let you take it away, and looking forward to your questions, everyone.
Superb. Thank you very much. Yeah, folks, also big welcome from my side. As we are short on time, 25 minutes, I cut the chase and already start sharing my slides. So I simply assume everybody can see that. Is that correct? I take that as a yes. Perfect, thanks. Okay, so today I'm gonna speak a little bit about organizational design, best practice for B2B marketplaces, I called it, and well, probably for any other company. Just to introduce myself, Gregor Stu, 35. I'm the co-founder and CEO of scoutbee. I'm an engineer by heart and founded scoutbee in 2015. We are a B2B buyer-supplier matchmaking marketplace. We have roughly 140 employees. And right now, post our Series B that we closed January or December, just a couple of months ago, with a $60 million of funding. And our investors are Atomico, Lakestar, Holzbrink Ventures, 42 Kevin, Next 47. So quickly, why org design was so important for us very quickly is we have to consider that we were founded in 2015, but we hesitate to take funding very long, and we were angel funded for quite a while. And in November 2018, actually, we collected our seed round. Series A followed quite quickly after, and then 5-6 months later, there was a Series B coming in. 2020, you will see, hopefully no fundraising. But that means pretty much that we went from C to Series B within 12 months with 240% growth, where our average time from seed to Series B is 31 months. So we are apparently within those 19 months in our structure, in our, let's call it, finding process. And we did a lot of things right, but also a lot of things wrong when it came to organizational design. And that said, upfront, organizational design does not mean an org structure. It is not an organizational structure. So org design means org design is a human-centered approach, how you can improve how people work together and how companies respond to change. So what's the narrative behind org design? So when you put the user in the center of a product design process, you probably know that already. That's called a design thinking process. And when you apply that design thinking to a shared experience of your customer or employees, then you call it service design. And if you apply that exact design thinking on the way how companies behave and change or work together, it's called organizational design, or org design for short. And org design is the next frontier when it comes to design thinking. And according to Deloitte, we want to believe them or not, it's a very important concern for more than 90% of senior leaders. It's really, really crucial and critical. So there are 10 principles of org design. So that means when you start designing how your org should work together, there are 10 principles. And those principles tend to change depending on whom you ask. So there are consultancies, there are best practices out there. They always come down to those 10 principles. Some vary, some not. So I will only focus on some of them, but you can certainly do your research on your own. I also posted the link below with a shortened URL. So if you start doing your design process, you should definitely first declare amnesty to the past. So you should look forward, not backward, and not think about what is sitting right there in your organizational structure, but rather completely disrupt the way you are thinking here. You have to design with DNA and fix the structure last, not first, 2 and 3. So that means org design actually means that the org structure comes last. You should make the most out of your top talent and focus on what you can control and not what you cannot control. Then 6, 7, promote accountability, and 7, benchmark sparingly, if at all. 7, I'm going to point out, do not go to a Harvard case study, do not go to a book or whatsoever. Don't ask me how I should design your organization. Nobody knows, you know best, and I'm going to show you how you're going to find it out. Then let the lines and boxes fit your company's purpose. We're going to cover that later. Accentuate the informal, and 10th, build off your strengths. So that doesn't mean that you should try to eliminate or work around your weaknesses, not at all. But certainly for your first take on org design, pick your strength, not your weakness. So you want to reorg. So almost all studies actually show that reorganization barely results in any higher efficiency, but rather in a deeper misalignment of teams. I've been there, I've done that. And the reason why I dug so deep into this topic was that my leadership team approached me and said, Gregor, we need a new org structure. We need a new organizational diagram. I was like, okay, let's get this done. Sat down a couple of weeks ago and started to redesign the organization together, of course, with my other managing directors, and then quickly figured out, that's probably not the best way to do it. It would have been the 5th or 6th organizational change. And in the end, we realized that we put so much thought process when we design a product. We just put so much thought process in user research, etc. But when it comes to organizational design, we are just like that and think with a nice Draw.io or Excel sheet, we are, master of puppets. So for the folks that I think that's a very interesting topic, but have to take care of your children and have to pick them up from the kindergarten, etc., I'm going to share resources first. So those are the most useful resources I have found, and I'm going to reuse a lot of them during my talk. That's no commercials, so I'm not an employee of Noble.io, but that's a very cool consultancy who has completely focused on that topic. Basecamp has a very, very good resource with Shape Up, and the 4 books below you probably know by title, and you should definitely read them if organizational design is somehow of interest of you, and it should definitely be. So an org chart does not define how your company work together. It's just our human take to make a complex and dynamic system look controllable. That was by me, actually. The thing is that if you know the phrase culture happens, also org design happens. So that means even if you design your silos and your reporting lines and so on, the organization will find ways to communicate more efficiently, to collaborate differently, etc. And how I saw myself is I wanted to have an organizational structure in place simply to communicate something out to the folks, and simply just to think that I have everything under control. But that is definitely not the case. And figuring out how the org chart looks like will take a while. So that means also the org chart comes last. And you see here, there are hundreds of different takes. And you see also here the different org designs of Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Apple, and Oracle. And obviously satire. But certainly one thing they have in common, they are all different, right? So Amazon has a completely different setup than Facebook has a different setup of Microsoft. That is, of course, not a representation of their original org chart. But that said, all of that is working out somehow, and they have something in common that's a very good culture market fit. And I come to that later. So why is org design especially critical for B2B marketplaces? And there's one single answer: a huge cognitive load on small amount of teams. So what does cognitive load mean? It's a term that refers actually to the load or to the working memory during your problem solving and thinking and reasoning. So how likely you are to grasp the global perspective on the issue. And in short, cognitive overloaded people make stupid decisions. and as they cannot grasp the final outcome. There are 3 dimensions when it comes to cognitive load. That's intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. I do not dig too much into this topic, but pretty much germane means that you have the overall narrative behind it. So you get intrinsic, extrinsic content, and your germane is what you reason about that. And if you get overloaded intrinsic, extraneously, you cannot build up a germane. You do not know what you are actually doing. You simply try to do the best out of the current situation. And I felt that is extremely accurate for B2B marketplaces, because we all know how our customers think B2B marketplaces work and what they do and what they actually do. B2B marketplaces are extremely complicated because of hundreds of KPIs and different dimensions. You have stakeholders all around the planet. And in the end, in B2B marketplaces, there are almost infinite dimensions. I'm going to read this text very quickly because of the complexity, including multifaceted external stakeholder structures, non-revenue generating product features, massive analytics on things like cohort retention, customer satisfaction process on products that you actually didn't even sell yourself, or buyer vendor intermediation, and just to name a few. And to figure out now what is the most meaningful setup in teams to attack the problems that you really want to solve is extremely crucial for the success of a B2B marketplace. So Org Design helps you to untangle this complex beast and to reduce the cognitive load on those singular teams that you can deploy later. Again, here, can't stress it out enough, org design does not mean org chart. The one thing more important than your org chart is actually the culture market fit. I've mentioned that before. And the culture market fit is actually defining how your company works and is aligned in the market that they are actually working in, and is not the representation of the latest Harvard Business Review case study. So an example, if winning your market means elevating a tool into a work of art like Apple, so by prioritizing, for example, things like design, form, function, etc., then you need a culture which values beauty and elegance above conventions. And on the other side, as a contrast, if you remain competitive means a flawless, reliable product, then you need to have a culture that values processes over creativity. And that difference has to be reflected in your org design, in your organizational chart in the end. In the end, it comes down to the competing value frameworks from Cameron and Quinn. MBAs out there have probably seen that before. Overall, they claim that there are only four choices, and this defines internal versus external focus and stability over flexibility. I like the approach of Noble IO a little bit better. It's a little bit more tangible. They say, okay, there are actually elephants, bees, wolf packs, and bird flocks. And that simply means that if you are a very process-driven organization and you're developing, I have no idea, toilet paper, or you're producing toilet paper, then a bird flock that is extremely agile and entrepreneurial probably doesn't make sense. Then a beehive makes sense. And if you are producing extremely disrupting software, you have to iterate through the markets, you have to talk to customers, you have to re-innovate all the time, then probably a beehive is not suitable for you. So you always have to find first your cultural market fit before you actually can start defining your org chart. I'm going to rush through those slides very quickly because that is quite obvious, but just want to stress it out again. There's another dimension when it comes to org design, and that defines, and that is the stage you're in at the moment. So different stages mean different strategic focuses. I'm going to focus now very quickly on seed, early stage, and late stage because I think that's the most relevant for this spectatorship. But overall, you have to consider that in seed, you probably have a focus on unity of command. In early stage, when you're scaling, you need formal planning. You need a product market fit. Late stage, you need formal structures to sustain your growth, etc. And figuring out here your culture market fit means that you probably have to reiterate. It might be that your culture changes and maybe in your market changes over the different stages within your startup growth process. How should my org look like? Would be cool to have a silver or golden bullet here, but actually don't ask me, I don't know. What I know is that this is how most organizations look like. And that is our organizational chart from 1917. And it is actually IBM. That was the first documented meaningful org chart out there. And folks, that's more than 100 years ago, right? So more than 100 years ago, where the world was stable, slow, iterations came cascadingly. This was the way to go. And within the last 100 years, we actually didn't question it. It doesn't mean that this is wrong or this is right. I just want to point out that we definitely, as B2B marketplaces, should question if that is the organizational design we should follow, because it was implemented and structured by one person one day, and it's simply right now the paradigm or the dogma that is sitting there. But there comes the rescue, Spotify. Spotify is revolutionizing management thanks to autonomy. So we have all heard that. And who is not aware how Spotify claims to work, it is, they have actually tribes, what can be described as business units. They have squads that are led by product owners. They have chapters, for example, product design, back-end engineering, front-end engineering, and then all of that can form into a guild. So extremely fluid, extremely revolutionary. And everybody hopped on this train a couple of years ago. And then a couple of weeks ago, this article came out, how Spotify failed using squad goals and why Spotify isn't using the Spotify model and why you shouldn't do. Well, thanks, right? So it doesn't seem like there is the golden or silver bullet, and there certainly isn't. I can tell you that we tried both hierarchically and waterfall over squad, etc. Right now we have a certain mix, and with the new step we are in, we certainly will have to reiterate. Squads did work for us in a certain setup, in a certain moment for certain teams, but not for overall company approach. What you have to make a decision for is actually quite straightforward. It should be fixed versus fluid. Oops, sorry. And the team of teams or lean startup in the middle can actually stretch out to Sociocracy and Six Sigma. So that said, the final decision you have to make, do you want to have a more fixed structure that is more output orientated, has a deep expertise, and is error reducing, or do you want to have a more fluid, novel organization that is mission driven, has a sense to respond, has a broad wisdom and diversity? Although all books recommend to not think that fixed is bad, I think fixed should be not suitable or will be not suitable for startups and growing in a growing phase. That will simply reduce your flexibility later on, but that doesn't also mean that you move completely to sociocracy. But certainly things like team of teams, lean startup, agile squads are probably the ones that you should rather consider than Six Sigma. Looking at the time, I'm in time. So from a model point of view, it's quite obvious. You only have 4 choices. You have a star, hierarchy, matrix, or full network, or a team of teams in those networks. But don't even think about that. Leave that completely behind you, and do not think that you have to draw an org chart in the end. If you start building your org, build it around 4 paradigms. And I think that turned out for me the most meaningful when I started the org design process for us internally. First, no silos, collaborate. Create a team, and team means autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Reduce the cognitive load on the certain teams. And control without competence is chaos. If you consider those 4 paradigms, and I hope they are quite straightforward, it is very likely that you come up with a very meaningful version 1.0 of your new organization. I mentioned now very quickly and frequently, again, cognitive load. So how can I reduce cognitive load? And overall, you have to create focus in your teams. That means you have to reduce the amount of extrinsic and intrinsic values that a singular person or singular team have to consider in order to create a meaningful outcome. And things you can use are theme, time, or scope. So a theme could be that you structure teams around industries, devices you're working on, a country, a revenue stream, a feature set, product categories, or market side ABC. Or you move it to a time and scope where you work rather in sprints and missions. Or in scope, you create guilds, chapters, and tiger teams that tackle a certain issue that right now is working, that is not working in your org or in your product, or global initiatives and customer-centric projects. All of that reduces the complexity in the team and in the final outcome, and it's way more likely that the team is also creating something meaningful for the whole corporation. However, don't be too fixed on org structures. Org structures can sit there. However, at least on our end, and I've spoken now to a lot of CEOs, most of them just sit there and nobody reviews them. We are not General Electric, right? So we are a very dynamic startup. People work as they wish, pretty much. But what I think is way more powerful than an org structure in the end are things like inspirational sprints and missions, a culture contract. So a contract where you actually define how you work together, how you operate together. Good meeting habits, clear purpose and vision and mission, constant communication on the focus that you're right now having, avoiding decision fatigue and cynicism, and have customer exposure to everyone. All of that, I would like to tick boxes for scoutbee in all of those, on all of those things, definitely not on our end. So we are also working on that. We are also constantly challenging here. And also from our side, we are trying to implement new things like, for example, our culture contract or even customer exposure to everyone. How do I get there? So actually, it's a sprint. So find your purpose in sprint. If you start your org design process, ideally you start with describing your organization. That can be anything. Here, I took an example that's called the organizational charter, was also for Noble.io. This is a take to describe actually in what kind of environment your company is in and how do you tackle that environment. So you start describing your environment, what markets are you in, what countries, what is the environment about. Then you describe the purpose, so the reason why you chose to work in that environment. And your strategies is what bets do you currently make to fulfill your purpose. And then you have the structures and systems, what is more or less the division of work and the tools you're going to use to fulfill your strategies. If that is done, then you can move actually to our normal organizational design sprint process. Again, here only an example, you can use any sprint process. The challenge here is certainly that in a normal design sprint process, you would sit down for 2 weeks, you would prepare, you would probably design and iterate on certain versions, you would prototype, you would show that to some customers, you would trial by that, and then in the end you would implement that. On organizational designs, it's a little bit more complicated because you obviously cannot shift around the org design back and forth all the time. That is also why, in my mind, it's way more important, going some slides back, to have things like inspirational sprints and missions or culture contracts in place so that you have a very stable culture, relatively stable habit, how your colleagues and your employees work together, and rather than trying now to get it nailed by the first time. Prepare your organization, prepare your folks that this will be an iterative process, and do not do that in a Petri scale. So do that on a scope where you invite ideally representatives from all teams, from all levels, not only directors, not only VPs, but rather also employees from that are early in your company or juniors, in order to also get massive buy-in in this process. And that's actually already it. So thank you very much for listening. I'm actually 1 minute early. And for the folks that want to check again on my resources, here they are. Feel free to make a screenshot and happy to take any questions.
Cool. So it looks like we have a couple of questions, and if anyone else has any additional ones, feel free to just comment in the chat. But the first one is from Thibault, who is asking, how did you design your sales organization to make it work hands in hands with your product initiatives?
That's a very good question. We failed here multiple times. To be honest, what we now are starting to do is to create mission-driven setups. So ideally, from our side, we were a little bit lucky because we have a customer that requested certain features that were already in our product pipeline. So we're now going to create a mission-driven team towards that customer, where we're going to align in that very mission, customer-centric product and sales, and see how those departments can collaborate towards a common goal together. And out of that, we want to take learnings in order to, in the end, find a way to let them collaborate. What is not working, we did this before, are squads, where you think that you simply deploy salespeople in those product squads, and they now and then show up and tell you what to do from a customer side. So we moved away from that very static approach and rather now try mission-driven setups where there's a very clear scope, a very clear time frame for that, in order to, again, to reduce cognitive load.
Cool, thanks. And the next question is from Jacek. So he's asking, if you had a chance to start over again, how would you establish organizational design specifically for scoutbee at different stages? For example, when you had 25 people in the organization versus 50 people and then 100 people?
Yeah, that's a good good question too. So what I would definitely do is actually do org design, because we didn't do it. We simply, well, that's a German phrase, from the hand to the mouth. That doesn't make sense in English. But we actually, we simply thought 6 months in advance. And with those 6 months in advance, we defined the org structure, we deployed it, done. We never actually took a lot of time to think this completely through. And if I would start over again, I would take this way more seriously, to really get the company buy-in, let them co-design how our org could look like, let them co-develop purpose, mission strategies and structures, and definitely try things out, like, for example, mission-driven teams or culture contracts to get more aligned internally. Because again, here, our org structure, when you think about an organizational chart, that's not your org. That is simply your picture of the org that you designed in January. In July, people have figured out to work different ways, and that org chart will sit somewhere in the corner. Nobody will care about that.
Yeah, makes sense. And then the final question in the next 3 minutes before we jump to the next speaker is from Jessica. So she would love to hear about what scoutbee does and how it started. So maybe you can provide a quick minute description, and then how you decided that organizational design was important. I think you kind of touched upon that in the last question.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Also to Sliman, very quickly, yes, we also have remote teams. So that's also an issue from our side, but probably will not be able to cover this question. But we can certainly chat later. Jessica, I didn't want to bore you out in the beginning, so I skipped that. What scoutbee does is we help large OEMs to find the right suppliers around the globe. So OEMs approach us with a certain need, for example, a certain part. They give us keywords, specifications, suppliers that they already know, and our engine in the background actually calculates potential suppliers to their product. The OEM can then pick the candidates that they like. We onboard them on the system. They can chat, they can collaborate, they can share files. And in the end, the process ends when the decision is made from probably 30, 40 suppliers in the beginning, and the purchasers pick the best 5, maybe also even based on price. So we are supplier buyer matchmaking. We don't do any invoicing, so not the final transaction. And how we decided that org design was so important. To be honest, I was looking for help. So I was looking for a new solution instead of sitting down now and draw IO together with my co-managing director, Fabian, and trying to figure out now the new silos. So I was researching a lot, and then I stumbled a couple of months ago across org design, and I find it absolutely helpful and extremely meaningful, and I have no idea why nobody does it.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Gregor. I know we have a lot of different questions. hopefully, I don't know if Gregor, you're staying with us for the networking later on. If you are, then hopefully some of you will be able to chat. And if not, hopefully some of the answers will also be answered by the next speakers. So next up, we actually have Matt O'Connor, who's the founder of AdQuick. But we're going to take a quick break, in a 5-minute break, and be back with the next speaker in 5 minutes, who will be talking about how to solve the chicken and egg problem. So thank you so much, Gregor. That was a really great talk. And really appreciate you joining us today.
Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you, folks. Take care out there. Have a good one.